the opportunity to sort of continue the conversation I feel like we've now been in for about a year. And I'm wondering if you can start by giving us kind of an update on where you think things are, how you think 2025 went, and how you're feeling moving into 26.
Great. So one, it's so great to be in front of an audience. Every time that I'm in front of an audience, it's certainly my fiduciary duty to tell people what's going on and make sure that we are as clear as possible in helping realtors get to their next transaction and helping brokerages make sure that they have a business going forward. Over the last year, so that's 2025, and then I'll get into 2026, it was super important for us at the beginning of the year to start thinking about and pinning the strategic plan for 2026 to 2028. We decided on a 3-year plan because 5 years is too long. You all know, just by virtue of being part of the industry, that there's enormous change. 2 years is too short because then that will incentivize executives, including myself, to make short-term decisions that could negatively affect the long-term outcome. And so we settled on a 3-year plan. We interviewed, focus group surveyed 100,000+ of our members. We met with CEOs around the country that represented 700,000 of our members. And so if you think about it, at the end of December of 2025, we had 1.47 million members. So we were able to touch a lot of the market. What we came up with was a plan that had you, everyone in this room, sort of at the center. When we think about macroeconomic issues, we took all of those into consideration. We took the diverse stakeholders that we have to manage across the industry, and we have more diverse stakeholders than the average company. And then we certainly had to think about our internal operations and how we had to modernize the enterprise very quickly. At the end of 2025, around November, at our next annual conference, we were able to pass that strategic plan unanimously. What that did was simply getting an industry that was going in many, many different directions and that did not have a lot of confidence in NAR. At the basic level, it got everyone on the same page. Do we have more aspirations to do things differently in the future? Absolutely. But that is sort of a baseline of how we're going to move forward. So we were excited about that. After that, then we said, okay, well, we've got to get the elements of an annual report. And so our annual report simply is what I call a shelf life of a year document. So it juxtaposes what we did in 2025 and promises, and it shows the promises of 2026. So all of that happened by getting stakeholders around the country involved, and over 2 million people were involved in that. If you think about the largest corporations, Walmart just got a $1 trillion market valuation yesterday. They have 1.6 million employees in the United States. Across the globe, they have 2 million people. So that's sort of the level and the scale of the ecosystem that we are trying to work to get together. So that was 2025.
I'm lucky because actually this is the second time that you and I are sitting down and talking today. We had an earlier discussion at CEO. And one of the things you mentioned there was some of the frustrations that you had heard both from leadership and on the ground, particularly about local and regional organizations. I'm wondering if you can talk a little here about how you're addressing that, the feedback you've gotten from realtors and brokerage leadership has informed what you're doing with the plan.
Great. So I think at the sort of through line here is absence of leadership, and there was an absence of leadership, and I think people around the country felt that in different ways. And what my hypothesis has always been, and it looks like it's bearing itself true, that once the National Association of Realtors really gets focused, then the spotlight will be shown on other elements of the industry that may need a little bit more watering and feeding. When we think about the three-way agreement, which is very powerful because one, that powers this advocacy engine that is the most envied advocacy engine regardless of industry based upon what it does on behalf of realtors, agents, and brokers around the country. But when we think about all of that and bringing that together, we want to make sure that our state and local partners also understand the criticisms that are in the market. This morning was a very rich conversation where I was able to sit and listen to how CEOs are grappling with some of the largest challenges in our industry. And these CEOs are very serious about ensuring that you all also get to the next transaction. And in doing that, though, they are also, like we at NAR, they are picking their strategic spots. And in doing that, they are also understanding and highlighting weaknesses across the country. And so it is our job, and we have a very strong partner that we plucked from the state ranks, the former CEO of the New Jersey Association of Realtors, who is now a very close partner, part of the executive team that I have helped build internally to help understand what is happening at the local and state level, ensure that those advocacy wins continue, but also strengthen those business models so that when people see the National Association of Realtors, some of them implicitly say state and local, but they also have to do a better job. And then one other thing, a lot of people are thinking about vertical integration in their businesses. A lot of people are thinking about horizontal integration in their businesses, and it's super important that as the National Association of Realtors, the base camp for what agents, realtors, brokers, and the like around the country are doing are not competing with those business models. So we have to really understand where that water's edge is and stay in our lane.
Well, I want to hear more about that, but first I want to touch on something that you've been mentioning, which is advocacy.
Yes.
Particularly in an environment where affordability is, I think we can say it's reached a crisis level
Yes.
in the country, and where we have seen a meaningful reduction in the number of transactions over the course of the past couple of years.
Yes.
What do you see as NAR's role?
So one, NAR, this is not to be braggadocious, this is just to be factual. NAR is the only institution in the country that is holding the line of this conversation. When people say, why is this on the president's agenda, it's because we set the table for it to be on the agenda. And to be clear, when I say we, it's the collective we, because this is your dues dollars. So it's not just me and my executive team and the advocacy team, it is we as an industry have set the table for this particular conversation. Yesterday, and there was an article in Fox that talked about the affordability crisis all over the map, whether you're looking at MS Now, Fox News, all the things. Not only are people quoting NAR statistics because we have just an incredible research team, but the advocacy team is working behind the scenes around the clock all day long to ensure that this is happening. But they can't do that without understanding what's happening at the state and local level. One of the reasons why our advocacy team is so strong is because it's not just in DC. If you think of the average lobbyist, 1-2 person team, this is a national team. You've got paid people at NAR, but you've also got volunteers around the country who are making sure that they understand all of the issues. You want to make sure that an issue in California does not metastasize across the nation, because if they are having inventory issues and if we are not on top of that and helping them in that regard, by the time it gets to New York, it could be a compounded exponential problem. And so we are managing that. This year is very important, 2026, the midterms, for those of you who are involved in the advocacy machine, whether that's RPAC or just giving. In general, you understand that we give 50% of our monies to Democrats and we give 50% to Republicans. And so we are the purple party. We are looking for people who are pro-realtor, pro-agent, pro-home ownership, pro-consumer. And on behalf of your dues dollars, that's how those are spent in Washington. So housing did not just come into the affordability conversation by happenstance. It was intentional.
I want to also touch on, you talked before about NAR not stepping on anybody's feet in terms of vertical or horizontal business model. Can you just say a little more about what you mean by that and what you really feel like NAR's lane is?
So NAR's lane is to be the base camp for the industry, and it is to be here for the independent contractors around the country that do not necessarily always have to stay with a particular brokerage. It's base camp. It's base camp for if you leave house 1 and go to house 2, then come back and get educated, network, all of the things. As it relates to, I'll give you a perfect example of competing. If I'm reading the publicly traded statements, annual reports of publicly traded companies, and I see that they are entering the title and the mortgage business, I would argue that none of our state and local, well, states aren't guilty of this, none of our local associations should be entering that business. That is not what we are designed to do. We are not designed to compete against our members. We are here to support our members, and that lane has to be clear. That said, over time, that has happened, and I do think due to a lack of leadership from NAR in the past, that sort of came in under the radar. But people are very clear, are you going to help me or are you going to compete with me? I have said, our leadership team has said, our executive team has said, and our board have said that we are going to help support, and so we have to uphold our end of the bargain in that regard.
We'll say. it feels pretty obvious that your job is here to be here to support the realtor community, but I think it's actually a reality that people don't always feel that way on the ground.
100.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about, the strategic plan. It's a big, meaty document, but in the day-to-day lives of the realtors in this audience, what can they expect to see or feel as a result of this strategic plan?
Sure. So I think you're going to feel before you conceptually understand. I think that's just the pathway and how we sort of experience life in a lot of different ways. Let's start with advocacy. We focus group surveyed tons of people across the industry, and when some people heard the word advocacy, they thought that we were just simply sending an email to a congressman or woman, some people who were less engaged, right? And so we're now sort of interchanging that language between advocacy and lobbying because we want people to understand what they're getting out of it. Advocacy has certainly been something that we've traveled around the country for, hundreds of meetings per year. You're sort of capped by the number of bodies that you have to go and tell people what we're doing on their behalf. But as part of their membership, we're bite-sizing that information to give people that information at their fingertips. We're bite-sizing the research pieces. This morning's conversation was a lot about consolidation and divestitures across the industry. Well, there are also 85,000 brokerages across the country. And so yes, you've got your large set, but just this week, through our broker toolkit, which is another sort of a piece of a nugget that people will get from that, is we've already spoken to 3,000 brokers just in the month of January alone. We have these virtual summits where we have a toolkit, almost business in a box, think sort of franchise-esque, with respect to what NAR can do on their behalf. But at the end of the day, we're also continuing to get tons of feedback there. Bite-sized research is super important. Governance, we're making sure that when people are making decisions on our behalf, that we are making these applications stronger so that we are getting more of the most qualified people based upon their resume in these rooms to make decisions on your behalf and on the industry's behalf. We just hired a new chief data officer, and so we're going to be looking at data very, very differently. We're instituting our own sort of AI policy internally to make sure that that makes sense, and to the extent that states and locals want to borrow that framework, they can do that. Some of them have their own. And so all of these things are just happening over time across all departments. Marketing is super important. The consumer ad campaign, reduced budget but amplified impact is super important. It is still our job at the end of the day to educate the consumer. So we're here on the realtor's behalf. The realtor is at the center of our mind, agent is at the center of our mind, but we know at the center of your mind is the consumer. So there's that other end of educating the consumer in different ways, giving you all marketing collateral. In our former sort of relationships that we had, there were all of these put your hands behind your back and they're tied and you're not able to use that collateral in different ways. Well, we've unlocked that so that people can see what's going on. Our events are changing. There are going to be much more belly-to-belly opportunities for people to network. We know that people have trouble with leads, right? It's not just digital leads. People want to be belly-to-belly and understand who they can network with, both in their market and then in markets across the country to continue to get to their next transaction. So in education, how do you take what you learn from advocacy, because we have a direct line to what is going on in DC, and quickly turn that into a piece of education where you will always be the most educated based upon what's going on. We did that with the buyer agreements. We continue to do that with first-time home buyers, because as those legislation changes, your clients' needs will change, and just continuing to get you up to speed on that. So basically, we're doing a lot.
I want to double click on a few different components of that. First, I'm very curious to hear from your perspective. Where do you think the realtor brand stands today? You are what's your aspiration for what happens there?
Because we are the National Association of Realtors, we do have a fiduciary duty to our members to protect the trademark. And so I didn't even mention this morning, but this is another sort of criticism around the country, that people don't know the difference. There's no daylight between a realtor and an agent. It is our responsibility to show that difference. And so the more people that are in the realtor family, the more people can take advantage of it.
Can you define for us right here what the difference between an agent and a realtor is?
Yes, so through a code of ethics, that's the first piece. That is a very, very important piece. We say that realtors show up to transactions more educated, having higher ethics in the conversation, and are able to get people to their next transaction with more nuance and understanding the landscape more than others. And that is not to insult people here, but that is the brand that we are building for those who are not realtors.
And you also mentioned data several times. I'm very curious, and at the CEO Connect conversation, we heard a lot of discussion about the MLSs, about consolidation of data. What do you think is NAR's role, both in terms of clarity around national data in the market and supporting the data infrastructure in the country?
Great. So first of all, we have to understand that NAR has sort of partnerships with companies around the country. Yesteryear, if you will, I think the relationships were tighter, but as the market continues to move, as people continue to get their strategic spots, as competition gets greater, there are people who are coming up with their own business models in order to move forward. So I'm not here today to speak on behalf of the MLSs. I think that would be a dereliction of duty. But we do have data around the country, specifically in our products, whether that's realtor.com, because of that relationship, or if it's because of Real Property Resource. About 500,000 agents and realtors around the country use RPR. Tons of companies use that as inputs into their data infrastructure to ensure that there is integrity in the transaction, to ensure that there is integrity in how they are using artificial intelligence, to ensure that there's somewhat of a CRM tool and that people are actually singing from the same hymnal. I know that people have frustrations with data presented this way on one platform, data presented that way on another. Well, we do have that uniform piece, but that is something that realtors have invested in. And by the way, this is free to you because your member dollars have invested in this very sophisticated technology, 20 plus years in the making. And right now, even conversations that we're saying, if there's a Bloomberg terminal version of an MLS, well, quite frankly, Realtors product, RPR, is at the forefront of being in pole position to be that. And so this is on the backs of Realtors, this is based upon an investment, and so that comes out and turns out free. So that's that piece. The other piece is just internally, how are we using data? So if I talk about our research, our chief economist and his team, how they use research and what they use research for, they crunch data in ways that people in the government don't even do it. And so lots of times the information is free, but we are the only ones on your behalf who are taking that information and making sense of it and going around the country and telling people what that means. So there's that piece. But then there's also the data that we have. And the data that we have is just realtor data. And if you think about the number of realtors that we have, how can you continue to power that data, propel that data to help do more predictive analytics, to help understand what's going on around the ecosystem, and then therefore to help brokers across the country decide what can we give them, what are they looking for in all of that data from a lot of people around the country. But I do want to say something because it is a rumor. We do not sell people's data. So there are people who we have to correct the record around the country, but I want to make sure that people here understand that we don't do that.
I want to just wrap up. When we were at CEO Connect, I asked you to give yourself a grade for the first, just a little more than 2 years, first 8 months as an interim CEO, now more than a year as the full CEO. How do you think you've done?
Well, could my grade have changed from then to now? Just kidding. It's only been an hour. I gave myself a B+, and this is not on behalf of my team. I have A players. We are trying to turn around what people consider the largest turnaround in real estate history. I'm a very tough grader, and I would give myself a B+. Now, if you had not known that I had done that this morning, I might have changed it a little bit, not to say that I have an ambiguous relationship with integrity.
But one of the things you talked about this morning is that as you look ahead to 2026, this is the year that you feel like you can move into getting an A.
Yes.
And maybe you can explain it a little more.
Oh, absolutely. So last year, we turned over 80% of my executive team. That means all of my sort of peer set. The peers that were not turned over are A players in any industry. And so while they were busy really doing the Lord's work on behalf of realtors, yes, there was a lack of leadership, and so there was a lack of cohesiveness, but I don't want to take anything away from the legacy staff that stayed, because they have done an incredible job. The National Association of Realtors didn't start when I started, right? They started 108 years ago, and these people have done incredible work, so I want to give a shout out to them. Because though I've changed over a significant number of staff, This is where the flywheel effect is going to start. It takes an executive a minute to get into his or her seat, to assess his or her team, to understand the strengths and weaknesses, and you have to give people an opportunity to create that department in the likely, or sort of the name, image, and likeness, if you will, not to steal from college athletics, but the name, image, and likeness of who that executive is. And so we have gone through that. We were hiring executives last May, all the way through, I think, July. And so some executives were still just getting their sea legs. Now that they have them, I believe that we are ready to run. And several of my peers are here today. It's not just me coming to Inman Connect to hear what's going on. I have peers who are here, who are in other meetings, who are sending each other notes saying, I heard this, you couldn't be at this particular meeting. All the things that other people do, but we are doing that in a way that we have not before. And I do believe that the industry will feel that significantly in 2026.
Looking forward to seeing that. Thank you so much.
Thank you.